點睇到幾多人啊？
Hello! Hi, everyone!
Hello!
This is our first time using StreamYard, so it's a little new for us. And so if there's anything that doesn't look like it's going right or anything like that, you can just let us know in the comments and we'll be like following along. But can everyone hear us all right? I just want to make sure. Oh, yep, I see some highs in the chat. Hi, Debbie from California.
Hi, Chris.
All right, so it's Callista here from Wonderfill.
And I'm Stephanie from Wonderfill.
It's nice to be with you guys today. And so we're going live, and it's going to be our Fire and Ice thread talk. But the threads we're talking about today are Rinse and Gone and Iron-infused.
Yep, that's right.
Oh,
all right. Oh, great. Okay, I see everyone's comments coming in now. We'll talk a little bit about how the questioning or the flow of this will go. It's like Calista said, it's our first time using StreamYard. So if we miss any questions by accident, we're very sorry, but we will try our best to keep up with everyone.
Okay, awesome. So, like we mentioned, today's topic is very interesting actually, because it's not a thread that's pretty. It's not a thread that hides. It's not a thread that's going to stay in your projects at all, really, because it's a temporary. We're talking about the temporary threads today.
Yeah, it'll be a temporary hold, like Callista said, but it's actually still a 40 weight thread. So you can actually use it in your top thread or as your bobbin. And we'll go a little bit more in depth about this.
About when to use them.
Yeah, about when to use them. Before we hop into it, for those of us, or for those of you out there that are a little bit unfamiliar with Wonderfill specialty threads.
Oh, or maybe it's their first thread talk, because we've never done it live before.
That's true. If this is your first thread talk, thank you so much for joining us. We're Wonderfill specialty threads. We carry 36 thread lines ranging from 3 weight all the way to 100 weight threads that come in cotton, rayon, polyester, metallic, hologram. And today we're specifically talking about a fusible thread and a wash away thread, which is super exciting.
Yep. So today's topic is going to be about Rinse and Gone and Iron-infused. So the wash away thread and the fusible thread. So these are some great these are some great threads because they have a lot of utility to them. There's a lot of ways to use them. Some might be really obvious, but some you might have never thought about before. So we're going to talk about how to use these really awesome threads. They are threads, but I almost think about it as like a tool or like a notion in your sewing room because they're really helpful to have.
Yeah, I would think of them like as a utility thread. Like they're here to make your sewing projects or certain techniques a little bit easier. They're a little bit of a shortcut, or they can actually help you gain a little bit more precision when you're doing certain techniques. So we'll go into a deeper dive for each of those topics.
Exactly. And I think for those of you guys that hate pinning, that's me actually. Like having threads like this is going to be super useful. So I think with that we can dive into it, and actually super exciting. We are going to have some live demos today as well, so hopefully that goes smoothly. But that'll be a fun part to add to our thread talks.
Yeah, and before we move on to, we have Alejandra who's off camera right now. She'll actually be the one helping us demo. So if you see us kind of talking off to the side, that's to Alejandra, and she'll actually be the one showing everyone how to use like a wash away or fusible thread and the applications of those.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now let's dive into it. Our first thread that we're going to talk about today is Iron-infused. So if you guys ever see it in the store, this is how the logo looks like. There's about 200 yards on a spool, and it just comes on something that looks like this. Now, we have so many beautiful colors behind us. Every thread line has like hundreds of colors, but this one is only going to come in white. There's only one color that it's going to be available in. And because it doesn't matter, it's not going to stain your projects. It's going to come right out. So let's talk about what is Iron-infused. What is iron fusible thread?
Right. So like we mentioned earlier, this is a 40 weight thread. So I'm actually just going to open this one up for us. Once I just cut my nails, so sometimes opening thread is never as easy as it seems. Okay. So I'm not sure how easily you can see. So this is actually a really soft thread. It's about a 40 weight. It's made of a material called vinylon. Vinylon. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And the characteristics of this is that it actually is softer. A lot of times, if any of you have had experience using a fusible thread, they tend to be a little bit thicker. This is actually still thinner, but it's able to hold your pieces down. And another characteristic is once you iron it and fuse it and it melts a little, it won't be as lumpy. So this will be a lot more obvious when you're using it in circumstances like applique, if there's just like one layer of fabric, or if you're doing like certain hems or even binding. You never want to have something like lumpy that's there and you're sewing over it or stitching over it too. So those are the two main characteristics of this thread. I'm sure we'll get a few questions of like, do I use this in the top or do I use this in the bottom? For both rinsing gone and iron infused, you can use it in either or both actually. And we'll go into the details of when it'll be appropriate, when it doesn't really matter, or when it would be actually more beneficial to have it in the top or the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Because it actually will make a difference between depending if it's on the top or the bottom or both, because that is going to be the fusible side, right? So you do want to think about where you want your thread to be, because that's where the fusible thread, whether it's on top or bottom, is going to be the point where it fuses. And like we've already kind of mentioned, but these threads are temporary. They're not meant to stay in your quilts. They're not meant to really stay in your projects, but they're just meant to help you sew your projects together and put everything together, or make certain techniques a little bit easier.
Yeah, so you will need to reinforce these placements.
Yeah.
So if you are using it for binding, you will have to add additional stitches to hold down the binding, but this will just keep it in place so you're not getting like wobbles while you're doing your binding. You're not getting like thick, wider spots and thinner spots. It's just to keep everything as uniform as possible, because sometimes with pins or even with clips, you have to remove them before it goes under the foot of the machine, and then things can end up shifting a little bit. So let's just dive straight into like the different techniques that you can use fusible thread.
For sure. So we're going to be sharing our screen, so you guys will be able to see a PowerPoint. It would be super helpful actually if you guys can just quickly let us know if you can see the screen that we're sharing. I think it should be working, but so. what you should see on the screen is we have kind of just like a illustrated drawing here where we have two pieces of fabric, and obviously they're not cut in the same place, or maybe you have something left over from another project, or you're just like really wanting to make sure that the pattern or the two pieces that you have match up perfectly.
Yeah, I think this would especially be helpful in circumstances where in our photo we have stripes, but if you're working with plaid or
pattern motifs
where you don't want it to be disrupted with just like a seam change where you're like having to connect the different pieces of fabric together, you can actually line them up on your ironing board. And then actually for this one's a little bit of a cheat. You don't even have to sew. You can actually just lay down a piece of thread and line up the pattern and just press it and hold it there. And it's as simple as that for the first one. You don't actually even need to like fully stitch it down.
You could fully stitch
it down, but this is like a little bit of a hack. If you're already matching up those patterns on like the ironing board, you can actually just like press it straight away and make sure those things match. Because, you know, sometimes even if you lift it off the ironing board, it just like moves a centimeter or just like a little bit, and you're like, oh man, I gotta rematch those lines together again.
For sure. I think I saw someone already mention something about like the binding, which is the second big thing that you can actually use the iron-infused for. So let me just mute this here. But you can see here we have kind of a quilt sandwich, and what you can do, this is on the sewing machine, but you can actually use this in your, I'm just going to give it a pause. You can actually use this in your serger as well. So if you do this method in your serger, you want to put the iron-infused in your lower loopers, and you want to use regular threads through the needle and in the upper looper. If you're doing this on your sewing machine, you can use a regular thread in the top, and then you can use your bobbin thread as iron infuse. And so what you want to do is you kind of want to stitch that binding down, so then it's on the underside of your fabric. So when you fold over your bias tape, you can iron it down, and that'll create your binding. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, one sec here. We're going to jump to Alejandra. She's going to show us, first of all.
Someone asked really quick too, is it like a thin fusible tape? I would say it's similar to a fusible tape,
But you can sew it.
Yeah, and you can sew it and it'll reduce the amount of layers you'll have to go through. Another thing with fusible tape, although handy, it can actually gum up your needle. I don't know if you guys have some experience using those fusible tapes with like zippers or even with bindings.
Exactly, because you actually have to stitch through it.
You have to stitch through it, and if you're not lining up your tape with your binding 100% and it pokes out a little bit, you can't wash it away, which is not always like ideal. So with the thread, you know, it's always being hidden, and then you reinforce it with sewing it down. So in Alejandra's example, or sorry, in the video we just showed you, that was more using like a domestic machine and just sewing it down. But Alejandra is actually going to show you a piece done that has a serged edge with the fusible thread in the lower loopers, like Callista had mentioned. And we can just pull that up now. Are you good to go?
Okay. Yep. Okay. So Alejandra's first going to show you how iron infuse works. We just did some really simple stitching. Let me add her to the stream here. And now we can see Alejandra. All right. Let's bring it over. All right. So Alejandra we just did a very simple example here where we used just a regular thread on top. I believe we just used something like Deco Bob. And then we used iron infuse on the bottom. And then Alejandra's going to use our awesome little Oliso mini iron here and give it a nice press. And this will just be enough to melt the iron infused thread onto the fabric below, and it will fuse. And what happens is after you're done fusing the thread, you can just remove the top piece of thread, and it will give you kind of enough of a temporary hold. Perfect. And Alejandra is just going to show that spot where she ironed, and you see how the top thread just releases like that? It's because that bottom thread has already melted already. So you see how the top thread just perfectly comes loose. Awesome. Yeah, up to the point where she ironed it. That's good enough, Alejandra. Thank you. And then if you can just show us the seam that was fused together from the piece you just did. Can you go back to your piece and just show the fused part? If you can just like slightly open it up a little bit so you can show that it's fused together. Perfect. Yes, that's
and
great.
This is just a quick demo to show how a fused thread works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so we'll move on to the binding with the serger.
So this is something we've already prepared. Mm-hmm. So what we have here is a quilt sandwich, and we've done this on the serger, I believe, with iron infuse in the lower loopers. Alejandra, someone says that your sleeve is very cute. So here, what we're going to do is we're just going to like fold that over and press the binding. And so this isn't in place of using like clips or pins.
Yeah.
Anything else that would kind of like keep it in place. And because there's a couple extra layers of fabric, you just want to make sure you give it a good press. And this is fantastic because then you can easily place your binding quickly, and it makes it very easy to like whether you want to like hand bind or machine bind the rest of the way. It makes it just really nice and easy.
Yeah, and serging it too is very nice. So you can see right there with Alejandra pulling it closer to the camera, it's actually very secure. So that's the nice thing about using the serger is you get enough thread coverage that the binding will stay put. It'll look even and it'll actually be faster because you're going through with the serger too. And that's the front side. And you can see too how even it is right there. And then you just reinforce it with either a straight stitch or you can do a whip stitch too to attach the back onto there.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't have a serger, what we showed you in the earlier YouTube clip was using a machine to do something like a zigzag or something like that. And that's really nice and easy as well. So I think there's actually a lot of applications that maybe we won't even think to mention here that you guys can get real creative with these temporary kind of threads to help you come up with solutions to maybe things that, are kind of annoying to do with pins or clips or something like that.
Yeah,
or
and
basting.
I would say too, if you have a serger, like this is such a efficient and nice application you can do it for. There's actually like quite a few YouTube videos that show how to use fusible thread in your serger, and some people just like swear by it because it's just so much faster, and you can just zip along, sew a straight line, and then it's pretty much like a guaranteed hold because you do have enough thread in the enough fusible thread to just hold everything down. And then have you like reinforce it, whether that's with like I said earlier, like some hand with whip stitching, or if you just want to do another straight line onto there.
Exactly. And I think a great point by Belle of Seam Sew Me is now you don't have to glue baste your binding anymore. I think with any kind of like fusible webbing or fusible tapes, gluing and stuff like that, a lot of the times it just has more surface area. So you might have to stitch through that kind of stuff, and it's
another layer.
It's another layer. It's also like not super nice when you go through it with like a needle, whether that's like on your machine or by hand. And when you have just kind of just like a thin, like it's just thread that's doing the fusible part. It's like it's very nice to work with, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So we covered lining up patterns, machine binding, and then binding with a serger. The next thing we want to cover is how to do a turned up hem with a serger. So especially for any of you that do some of like garment work, this is also a handy little tip where you can serge the edge of the fabric, turn it up, press it down, and it'll just hold it all in place very nicely. And we have some photos and videos to show you. So you have a better understanding. Exactly. I know it's hard to always like explain it without seeing some visuals too. So.
Exactly. I'm actually really wanting to show them some closer up images of that binding technique.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We could see it kind of in the video, but let's look at it closely in the binding. So this is a graphic image of, for example, if you put it in the zigzag, if you use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, and then you'll be able to kind of see that it has a lot of good coverage. So when you iron it, it'll hold it really nicely in place. So this is the example that we did on the serger, though. So this is what Alejandra was doing. She had a different sample there, but these are just kind of like closer still images we had of everything.
Here, do you want to go back? Okay, so this is the underneath of the project. So like the back side where the iron-infused was in the lower loopers. So this is the photo. You can see that white thread there in the lower loopers. And then you can see on this image, it's the binding with your regular thread and your needle and your top looper. And then so what Alejandra did was she flipped over the binding and pressed it down onto the iron-infused thread.
And then voila, you got a really nicely placed binding. It's almost tempting because it looks finished already, but no, you still got to stitch on top because, again, this is a temporary solution. All right. This is we just went and machine binded it. All right. Now let's talk about the the rolled up hem, which is what turned up hem, that Stephanie was talking about.
Yeah, so it's honestly a very similar concept to binding with the serger. You're just doing the serging with the fusible thread again in your lower loopers as you're going along the edge of your fabric. Once you're done, all you have to do is flip it up and then iron it down where however wide you want your hem to be. You just iron it down and it'll stay there. But of course, you have to reinforce it again with just like a straight stitch that'll look super nice. It'll be all pressed in the right spot too. So we have a quick video to show you, I believe,
Yeah.
of this example.
I think we had a quick question: is that a 2-thread, 2 or 3-thread? We used 3 threads. We used the iron-infused in the lower looper, and then we used regular serger thread in the upper looper and in the needle. And yeah, definitely easier than glue basting. People keep talking about glue basting, or glue basting. And some other people asked about basting a quilt later. So you're getting ahead of us. You know what's coming, because like that is going to be something we're going to talk about in a little bit here. But while we're on the topic of kind of the turned up hem, I want to mention that if you do not have a serger, you can absolutely use the thread in your sewing machine and just have it on the bottom side of your fabric. So whether that means putting it in your bobbin or reverse sewing it and leaving the iron fusible thread in the top and using a regular bobbin thread in the bobbin, both are good.
Yeah, and in this circumstance, you don't need it top and bottom. One or the either will actually both work. You really just want it so that you have one side that can fuse to the back.
Exactly. All right. Shall we look at some videos?
Right.
Let me play this one here. And so here we have the iron infuse in the lower loopers and the top thread in a regular serger thread in the upper looper and a regular serger thread in the needle as well. So you can see here. And now for the turned up hem, it's very simple because you just fold it up, iron it down, it stays in place, and then you can do your top stitching or whatever you need to do to hold it all together, and it's very nice and simple. So I believe we have another technique that's kind of related to this, and that is actually with pockets. So pockets are a great place to use iron infuse and rinse and iron infuse, not rinse and gun, to use iron infuse. So I'm going to actually jump back over to Alejandra over here. And she's going to show you, we kind of just did a pocket on a piece of fabric, but we used iron infuse to actually do the hem of the pocket. So you can see here, this is the finished product, but Alejandra will show you kind of the work in progress version. So Alejandra, can you explain what we have here?
Oh, I think she's muted.
Yeah, I'll just bring it over to her.
I think it's this one.
Okay, I'm going to unmute you, Alejandra. Oh, how to unmute. Oh, I can't unmute you. Can you unmute yourself over there?
Here.
Oh, Stephanie's going to run over. One moment.
There you go. We're good.
Okay, so can they hear me?
Yep, I can hear. Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you.
So basically we have the pocket here, and I search the edge with iron infused in the lower looper to make the seam easier. So basically I'm just gonna iron this part. Let me just move this one. So I'm ironing the seam.
And just a quick question:
Okay.
if the serger lower looper fusible, I have to unmute us.
I'm just going to answer a quick question here. If the serger lower looper fusible thread extends a little past the binding, does it disappear? It is important that if you have any loose thread ends, especially for fusible thread, you do want to clip those off so that your iron won't be going on top of those. It'll just probably, it might leave like a little mark on your iron, but to avoid this, just if you clip the ends or tuck them in so it doesn't get ironed, that would be the best practice.
Okay, Alejandra, sorry to interrupt that. Okay. Yeah, so can you tell us what you just did there?
Yeah, so I iron the seam here to tuck it in place, and then I fold it down, and then the next step is to make this top stitch, as you can see here. So using iron and fuse is really helpful because it keeps the fold in place and it's easier to sew here. So I also searched this part because after you sew the top stitch here, you can fold it and it's gonna stick as well. So
That's awesome. So that makes it really nice and quick. So then you can have really crisp edges. There's no pins involved. So you got just only like a flat, nice pocket, and it's very easy to place, isn't it?
exactly, yeah. So I have it here, and let's say I iron it all.
Yeah.
So when I'm sewing here, close to the edge, it's really easy, as you can see here.
Because everything is already tucked away nicely and it's all fused so it holds together and it won't pop back out, right?
And it's all uniform because you see where that 1/4 inch is.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks for showing us that example. All right.
Okay.
So now we kind of talked about hems and kind of using that to our advantage when we need to like tuck some things away. And now let's talk about machine applique.
Yes.
Because that's actually a huge application.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to our presentation over here. I believe there we go. And let's flip to the next page.
So some advantages when you're using a fusible thread instead of some other substitutes is that it'll give you a much more flexible look. This will be a lot more obvious when you're doing applique because you're
versus webbing or fusible back.
Exactly. Because webbing and fusible back, it'll adhere both piece of fabrics fully together. So you're almost gluing everything together, which will make it lay really flat. And so if you're wanting more of that like organic or puffy look, or you're not wanting just
to stitch through extra fusible,
if you don't want to stitch through extra fusible, or you just don't want like a stiff looking outcome, then in this case, like having the fusible thread there will keep things like very natural and make it look a lot more like hand done.
And you can just take your applique piece, just stitch around the edge, and if you use the fusible thread in the bobbin, then it becomes a fusible piece already.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can easily stitch that down and then throw your satin stitch or whatever kind of, if you're doing that type of applique, it's very easy to maneuver it. And if you place it in the wrong part, you can actually just peel it up. It will hold, but if you peel it, it will peel as well. And you can actually reposition it and re-iron it, and it will refuse as well.
Yeah, and like Calista said, this is one of those circumstances too, where you do have the option of putting the thread in the top or putting the thread in the bobbin. In this photo, it's in the bobbin. But in that case, you'd have to like wind your own bobbin with the fusible thread. But you can most certainly actually put it in your top and just flip your fabric to the wrong side and have your traced out pattern on the other side too, and achieve the same result. You just flip it back over when you're fusing it to your other piece before you're doing your applique. What else did I want to add? Like Alejandra demonstrated earlier too, once you have it in the position that you want and it's ironed down, even before you applique it, you can actually already remove that top thread from your work. So it's already stuck on there. All you have to do is do the applique work, and you can also already remove the top thread. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Do we have any videos for this one?
Let me check here. No, we don't have videos for that one, unfortunately.
I hope that explanation makes a little bit of sense. As long as you're tracing the image and being mindful of which side has the fusible thread, that's just how it'll go down. Like I said, if you have the fusible thread on the top, you will have to stitch, or
reverse.
You will have to do some reverse sewing and making sure your patterns match up the same way.
Exactly. Another great thing is actually zipper placement. So what you can do is where you have your zipper is you can baste your two pieces of fabric together, and then in the seam allowances, use iron-infused on the top, so then the top part becomes fusible, and then lay down your zipper, iron that on top, and it becomes temporarily placed there. So when you flip it around to do your top stitching and everything like that, it becomes really easy because you don't have to deal with like pins and clips, because zippers are already bulky. If you have all that extra stuff in there, it makes it even more annoying to do so. So we actually have a video of this as well. So let's cut to that. So you can see here, what we're going to do is we're just going to baste 2 pieces of fabric together, press that open, and then in the seam allowances, we just chose a zigzag stitch here. Again, we choose zigzags because it gives you lots of coverage. So we're using the iron-infused in the top, and then a regular thread in the bobbin, I believe. And then what you want to do is you want to place your zipper, then you're going to press around it, and then your zipper is going to be temporarily placed. And then you can just take your zipper foot and you can just sew around that zipper to hold it down permanently. So we'll just go around the zipper there. And then you can just go in with a seam ripper and open up those basting stitches. And then look at that. You got a really beautifully placed zipper and all the lines are perfectly straight. That's not easy to do with pins, at least for me.
No fusible tape, which is fusible tape was my go-to before iron-infused. So
yeah, so the zipper placement is actually a great way to use iron-infused and rinse. I always want to say and rinse and gone because I always talk about them together. But let's go to the next example. It's another garment type of example. So sometimes when you need to kind of do a curved hem, it's easy to kind of like ease in that curved hem by using iron-infused in the bobbin. So you want to sew your hem, your curved hem, and then I'm going to show you this video here again. This is actually on our YouTube channel as well. So this is the curved hem. We're going to sew with iron-infused in the bobbin, regular thread on the top. And then you just want to kind of pull that bobbin thread so then the fabric kind of gathers and you can create that really nice curved hem, and then it's easy to kind of place it where you want it to go, because again, all it takes is that iron to press it down and it'll hold everything in place. And then whether you want to hand stitch it down or if you want to machine stitch it down, that curve is going to hold nicely, and it was really easy for you to position everything as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see there it's got a good hold. All right, let's come back to here. And I think that's actually it for kind of ideas on how to use the iron-infused.
Mm-hmm.
And before we jump into rinse and gone, I was just wanting to know if anyone had any questions at this point. We've been trying to answer along the way, so hopefully we didn't miss anyone's questions, but hopefully you can see kind of how easy it is to use iron-infused and like what a hack it is, instead of like pinning stuff sometimes, or just like that temporary hold that it gives.
Yeah, for sure. I think my favorite technique is definitely like with the binding. It just makes things go by so much faster, especially if you do have a serger. I find it like such a shortcut to just put it in your lower looper and go. And that kind of skips the step of having to do extra pinning or clipping or taping or gluing. So
absolutely. Okay. Yep. So now we're going to jump into rinse and gone. So rinse and gone is the one that dissolves in water. So this is as easy as just wetting a toothbrush or soaking it in a little bit of water, and it releases right away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It'll actually, like Liz just said, it'll pretty much dissolve, so it'll disappear. So this is also why it's very important that when you have one or both of these, that they're clearly labeled. If the sticker ever pops off, you still want to make sure that you somehow label it
or mark it
with some nail polish. Especially important for rinse and gone. You don't want to make any garments with this. That would be a very bad thing. So put it in a plastic bag and make sure it's labeled rinse and gone. If you live in a humid place, I saw there's a few people from Florida, for example, you would definitely want to keep it in more of a dry environment.
Yeah, so just putting it in a Ziploc is really easy, because then it's really easy to
Yeah.
like have it have any contact with like more extra moisture
Mhm.
or water and things like that. So we kind of want to show you how this works. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to jump over to Alejandra, and she's going to show you guys how that rinse and gone works. So let me just add you back, Alejandra, and zoom in. There we go. All right. So again, we just sewed a very simple kind of rectangle because all we want to do is show you how the thread works. So we have rinse and gone in the top, and then we just have a regular bobbin thread, and you can see that line of thread just pretty much disappears right away. And you don't have to do any really aggressive scrubbing or kind of anything to remove the thread with too much difficulty, because just soaking it in a little bit of water and like a little gentle abrasion from like a toothbrush or a towel or something is just enough to get that thread to totally go away.
Uh-huh.
So we sewed it closed, but obviously if there was like a loose tail, it's easier to pull up there. But you can see the bobbin thread is going to just
release
because that top thread is now gone and there's nothing to hold those stitches together.
Yeah.
So again, this is a temporary placement. We're going to give you guys a bunch of ways to use this thread, but that's to give you an idea. So you can see that top layer of stitching where Alejandra wet it with the toothbrush.
Hold it a little bit closer.
Yeah.
So right there you can see that white thread is essentially gone.
Yeah.
You don't have to put your whole quilt or your whole project in the wash or in a tub of water. You can just do something like wetting a toothbrush and brushing it, even if you have a little spritzer bottle. Just giving it some time to dissolve will.
And there's still some parts that have a little bit of thread on them, but the longer it kind of sits with the water as well, the more it's going to like dissolve completely. And if you want it to be a quicker process, then use a little bit more water or just give it a little bit more of a hard scrub compared to like the gentle brushing that we're doing here. How do you keep it from breaking? I live in Florida. So the thread shouldn't break if you store it in a dry place. It's not too much of an issue. Again, we just suggest putting it in like a Ziploc bag whenever you're not using it.
Yeah, Ziploc bag, put it in like one of your drawers or something, and it should be fine.
Okay, so let's give people some ideas now on how to use rinse and gone.
Yeah. You'll definitely start recognizing a theme with rinse and gone. A lot of it has to do with basting. I'm sure some of you guys could have already guessed that, but we'll show you videos, photos, and different examples too of where these basting applications can be applied to. And then like it's not just only for quilting or only for applique or only for embroidery. There's actually a lot of different examples, and we'll pull all those photos up for you to take a look.
Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. And the first example we want to talk about is basting for quilting. So this was kind of brought up earlier already, but you can see here, we actually basted not just around the quilt sandwich, but we actually basted on top of the quilt sandwich as well. So on the right hand side, we kind of just did like a loose grid, and on the left hand side, we didn't baste on top of the quilt top. So as you can see here, this is a really good example of kind of using rinse and gone when you have a pattern or kind of like a piece project that has a lot of small pieces, or it's really obvious because there's a lot of straight lines in this project as well. Because when you're doing something, especially like free motion quilting or something like that, it's multi-directional. You're kind of always moving from right to left and then left to right, and it really drags and moves the fabric around as well. So when you kind of are able to baste it all over, it keeps everything really secure in place, again, without having to use pins and needles and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if you guys can see here, but we chose obviously a piece that makes it a little bit more obvious so you can see what we're trying to talk about. But because it's a grid, it's got a lot of small pieces to it, and the lines in this pattern are very straight as well. So we did the same type of free motion quilting all over top of it. We used a finer thread, so it's a little bit hard to see maybe. But we did do free motion quilting all over top of this piece. And you can see on the left-hand side, some pieces do end up kind of getting shifted a little bit, and not so much on the side that was basted.
Yeah, I just see a quick question here about if you use a dry iron on rinse and gone, would that work? And then you use iron infused in the bobbin and rinse and gone on the top. I've tested this theory. As long as your iron does not have any steam coming out of it, your rinse and gone will be fine, and your iron infused will still melt. Exactly.
Okay, so that's for machine quilting. So again, it's great when you have a lot of small pieces, when you have a lot of straight lines and things like that as well. What did you want to add, Stephanie?
I was going to say too, this is especially helpful if you're using a polyester batting, because compared to a cotton batting, or if you have any like fusible in your batting too, those won't move around as much, especially when you're doing free motion quilting. Like Calista said, when you're going like left and right, that's when most of that shifting and movement will happen. If you're using a polyester batting, that's probably, I would say, more slippery than the other. It's not going to just like slip and slide out from under you, but it will tend to move a little bit more than those other types of battings. So basting it with a wash away thread like this will be especially helpful in those circumstances. And I wanted to also add just like a quick tip for any people that do like long arming, but they're long arming different projects at the same time. You can also just baste it really fast on your long arm, and that will actually also help loading and unloading different quilts, because for us, we have 2 long arm machines at our office, and we're always loading and unloading different quilts onto there. So sometimes we'll just add a quick baste on the long arm machine, and then after, as we're quilting, we can just spritz as we go to release the thread in the back. And the second tip I wanted to add is we've also basted quilts on the long arm for people that do hand quilting, actually, just to hold everything in place. And to do it in kind of like a really fast way, especially depending on your size of the quilt as well. It's also like a little tip for any of those hand quilters out there.
Okay, so we have a couple questions that we want to answer. So the first question is, what size needle would you recommend? So it's close to a 40 weight thread. So any needle that you use with like about a 40 weight, something like an 80-12 would be pretty good to use this thread with.
Both threads, actually.
Yeah, both threads are about a 40 weight, so like an 80-12 would be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And then the other question I have is related to iron infused that we didn't get to earlier, but with iron infused, does it stick to your iron and leave a residue? So iron infused is still a fusible, and like any fusibles that you would use, whether that's fusible webbing or whatever, like you don't want direct contact with your iron for sure. You want to be careful to not have that directly touch, because it could give a little bit of sticky residue. Not anything that you wouldn't be able to remove, but just to avoid that overall would be better.
Yeah, that's why kind of before I was mentioning like being really mindful of being aware of like if you're using in your top and if you're using in your bottom, how you're fusing it to things. You always want that layer of fabric in between, especially if, for example, you're using white thread as your like regular thread and you have iron infused as your other. It can get a little bit confusing. So even just marking your fabric a little bit to know which side you have the fusible thread on would be very helpful. And snipping those thread ends, like I mentioned earlier, so your iron will be nice and clean.
Perfect. All right. Okay. So that's basting for quilting. And now let's talk about basting for applique.
Yeah.
So again, there's another applique application here that we can talk about. Exactly. I think this is the video. Yes. So this is a really interesting technique. Maybe what we can do is show Alejandra demoing it live for us first, and then we can come back to our slideshow. So let's add Alejandra back in here and give her the spotlight. Okay, Alejandra.
Does she need to go through it?
Yep. So I have your mic unmuted now.
Okay, so basically I have my piece here, and I'm just gonna show you how it's gonna be the end result here with this technique, which is really nice when you are sewing an applique, a curved applique. So you just need the
You need the fabric that's going to be your applique, and then you can just use whatever scrap fabric because this doesn't matter at all.
exactly. So we're gonna cut it to be able to flip it.
So it's kind of like if you were making like a bag or something like that.
You're just flipping it inside out.
Can you bring it into more of the center screen? Perfect. Yeah, so you flip it inside out. Now this part is important because now it looks like this. It's flipped inside out. You've got your shape there.
I'm gonna whip.
Now she's gonna wet the seam with the toothbrush again.
You can either wet a toothbrush or you can actually use your iron with a bit of steam.
Oh yeah.
On the highest steam setting is what we would recommend. So we just kind of wet the fabric first, and now Alejandra's just gonna iron it here.
Yeah. So she's just pressing it so that seam, when she pulls apart the two pieces,
so it's turned under.
Exactly.
So I'll show you here in a second. And now,
ta-da! It's like a magic trick, isn't it?
that scrap piece of fabric releases and your whole piece is all turned for you. So now it's very easy to just place it wherever you need it to be.
You have really clean lines.
You have really clean lines as well. And now all you need to do is your applique.
Exactly. So I hope that makes sense. Our video showed exactly what Alejandra demoed. So
yeah, so you can actually go to our YouTube channel. It's Wonderfill on YouTube. Some of you guys obviously are joining us from YouTube, so you already know what the channel is. But it's 5 ways to use water-soluble thread. So again, what we did here is we had the piece of fabric that's going to be used for the applique, and then we sewed it with a piece of just scrap fabric or whatever, right sides together, and then we kind of we cut a hole onto the scrap fabric, turned it, and then we ironed it and used a little bit of water, whether that's water or steam, and the back fabric is going to totally release, and what you get left with is actually your needle turned applique, and all you have to do is applique it now.
Exactly. And like we mentioned before, you don't have a stabilizer underneath that can stiffen your project. You can just stitch along the edge how you like, and both the applique piece of fabric and your backing fabric are actually separate, so you'll get that nice, like not looser look, but it's not going to lay like glued flat down onto your projects.
Okay, so the YouTube video, I'll still play it. Let me come back to that screen now. Let me just switch back. Perfect. And then we'll get that going. So again, this is on our YouTube channel as well, but this time we did a heart, and you can see same technique. You cut a hole in the scrap in the back after you've sewed them together. And in this example, we actually didn't use any water, I believe. I think we just had a higher steam setting. Oh no, we did use water. Excuse me. But we still pressed it, so then you get really flat edges, and it makes it really nice when you do your needle turn applique. And you can see that's going to help the back release, and then you get a really nice piece of fabric ready to applique.
Yep. And all you have to do is just trace your applique pattern, sew it out, cut around it. It's as simple as that.
Exactly. And I think there was already a comment that might have guessed what our next technique we want to talk about is, but it's actually embroidery.
Yes.
So here we have two examples, one where we didn't baste the embroidery and one where we did baste the embroidery. So what the great thing about rinse and gone is you can actually baste very close to your embroidery design, or even baste exactly where your embroidery design is going to go, because it's going to disappear and be removed later on. Whereas when you usually baste around your hoop, or you can only get so close to your design, and sometimes you really can't get close enough, and it still will pucker and things like that.
Yeah, especially with some embroidery machines now that are getting bigger hoops. Whether you're doing a big design in the hoop or whether you're doing a small design in this hoop, it's always important to baste, but not just around the edge of the hoop. What you can actually do is almost do like a grid. Um, Almost do like a grid on the piece of fabric before you even start embroidering, just to hold everything in place. Because even with just basting top and bottom, you'll still get that differential movement with your fabrics moving at different times. Microscopically, it's not going to be like this, but it'll move a little bit, and that's when you start getting those like puckers next to your design. So
absolutely. So I this is just what we did. Of course, you can do different types of basting, and this one, it doesn't matter that you just use rinse and gone in the top, because we're not stitching over top of this thread. So once we're done the design and we remove the thread, the back bobbin thread will just release. But if you're going to be doing something like a grid, or something that you're actually going to embroider over top of the rinse and gone thread, you probably do want to use rinse and gone in your bobbin as well, because otherwise your bobbin thread, that if you didn't use rinse and gone, would be trapped.
Oh yeah, that's very true. So yeah, definitely in those circumstances, if you're doing dense embroidery, especially, that'll be really helpful. And I just want to like hop back to basting with quilting really quick. You can actually use rinsing on top and bottom if you're doing like really dense quilting, because it'll be really hard to like pick out those threads in the back after, versus just like spritzing it and letting it disappear.
Absolutely. And we did get a question here that's, sorry, I'm late. Can I rewatch this later? So I think we do have this recording, so we will post after we are done the live session as well. So if you missed anything, you can go back and rewatch. But also, if you want the shortened version of what me and Stephanie are talking about, also, we have really great YouTube videos. We have two of them, one on rinse and gone and one on iron-infused, separately on our YouTube channels as well, that kind of give you like the short form of this thread talk today.
Yeah. The next thing, is there anything else we wanted to add about embroidery? I'm sorry, I might have jumped ahead a little bit there.
No, I think that's good. I think that's
Okay.
that's the tips for embroidery. And then what do we want to talk about next?
Another thing too that you can actually do with rinse and gone is you can actually tack your quilt sandwich together with it too, especially if you're matching any sort of pattern from the front to the back or back to the front, where you have like exact points where you want your quilting to be done, and it's not just one big piece of fabric in the back. You actually want it to like match something. You can actually just do it by hand and just tack down different corners or different parts of where your pattern you want it to stay exactly put. You can tack it down too, just by hand. So that's all I wanted to add in terms of like some little handwork there.
Speaking of embroidery, I think we actually forgot to mention a really quick thing when it came to iron-infused, is if you ever do little like patches for your jacket or things like that, you can do some really simple stitching on those patches to, again, have it in your bobbin so you can adhere it onto your jacket or whatever very easily. And I think Alejandra actually had a quick sample of that also. So what she had here was she actually what a cute little patch she made. But she actually stitched around the edge of the patch with iron-infused. And so when she goes to press it down, for example, on a jacket or a pair of jeans or something like that, then it's going to be able to fuse in place. I'm sorry, did you turn off the iron?
Yeah.
But what you could also do is if you ever use iron-infused in the bobbin of your embroidery as well, it does make your embroidery fusible. So it's easy to kind of applique that onto something else afterwards also.
Okay, now it's coming out.
Okay. Maybe I'll go.
Sorry, we made you reheat the iron.
Are you pulling the thread away? I'm just going to hold it up closer to the camera. I don't know if you can see. So she's actually able to pull that thread.
So can you hold
away.
it up closer to the camera, Stephanie?
Yeah.
So Alejandra just stitched around the edge of the circle with a bit of iron-infused in the bobbin and just a random basting thread on the top. And so once it's ironed, that patch will be able to stay in place, and it's really easy to stitch it because sometimes, especially with these heavier patches, they're harder to pin in place and things like that. So that's another great way to use it. Okay, so another one I want to talk about, let's go back to rinse and gone now, is trapunto.
Yes.
Trapunto is a great way to use rinse and gone. So let me just hop back into our presentation here. But what's great is if you ever do, trapunto is kind of a difficult technique. You're working with a lot of different layers. So what's great about it is you can have your top piece of fabric that you're going to be stitching on, and then you can put your 2 layers or however many layers of batting and trace your design and then stitch over top of it with rinse and gone, and that will kind of combine your few layers together with your top fabric and your 2 layers of batting to create that trapunto effect. And what's great is afterwards you can cut out the shape of your trapunto and then add your other batting and your backing and then all the layers. You can now do your trapunto technique, and at the very end you can release that rinse and gone thread, that wash away thread.
Yeah, and I wanted to just add really quick for those of you that don't know what trapunto is. It's actually just quilting with kind of like a stuffed look in certain parts of your quilt. If you're ever looking at your like quilt shows and you're like, how did that person get such a puffy like design like right here and only here specifically? It's usually with trapunto, and like Calista said, it's going to be multiple layers of batting, but they're not going to be using multiple layers of batting throughout their entire quilt. It'll actually be just those specific points where they want it to like puff out, and this is where using a wash away thread is very helpful for that purpose,
because you can cut out your shapes very exactly. So you can actually do a lot more intricate type of trapunto because you can trace your design on the top of your fabric and then sew with your few layers of batting with that wash away thread. So then you can secure all those extra layers together and then cut away any extra batting very easily.
Yeah.
And then after go ahead and quilt the rest of your piece.
Yeah.
So this is what we did here. We created that shape and stitched that shape out with rinse and gone, and then we quilted the rest of the area, and afterwards you can stitch on top of where that shape was and use a toothbrush, and that will release the rinse and gone that is underneath that area. We have someone that loves trapunto, so hopefully this thread will come in handy to you.
Yeah, and like I said, if it's difficult to understand with us describing it, there's so many videos on YouTube that actually show how to do trapunto work with a wash away thread. So I definitely wouldn't hesitate to just get some ideas from here, and you can definitely like reinforce it by just like looking up some YouTube videos as well and seeing it in action, because that's actually how we learned about a lot of it too when we were also making samples and developing the thread and everything like that.
So we have another, this one's kind of like a little bit of a cheat, a little bit of a hack. But if you guys ever have water soluble stabilizer and you have random pieces of it that you just want to use up, but they're too small, or if you need like a much larger piece
And you don't want to throw it away.
and you don't want to throw it away, or you have a larger hoop and your stabilizer is too small to fit in that hoop, then you can actually use the water soluble thread in the top and in the bobbin to stitch that together, and then you can create a larger piece of water soluble stabilizer.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. I think the next thing is back to garments, I believe. So we have a couple more techniques to share with you guys. So that was the trampunto. If you guys are ever sewing with garments and you need to gather fabrics or do any bunching, anything like that, it's easy to do that and temporarily hold it in place with rinse and gone before you actually stitch all of it down. And it just kind of helps you kind of without having to worry too much about making sure it's like it's hard to kind of bunch everything and like you want it to stay in that shape but pin, so it's easier to do that with something like rinse and gone, so you can stitch it down, it's held firmly, and then you can sew over top of it with your regular thread on top. And that will give you your final look and a finished look like that, which is a common technique that you see in garment sewing a lot. And I think, was that it, Stephanie, for techniques?
That is it for techniques.
So this is a picture of how we store our rinse and gun. We just kind of keep it in a bag there. But that's it. Those are the ways to use temporary threads like rinse and gone and iron-infused. And I hope this kind of gives you guys an idea of like how the thread can be used, but I think there's actually so many applications for threads like this. And exactly, someone just said pleats. Pleats is another great example of when you can use iron-infused or rinse and gone.
We didn't pull up the video, but as you could see, like when we were pulling up the different videos, it's actually all from one YouTube video that shows the different ways of using iron-infused, and one of the methods was pleats. So yeah, you're right on there. Right on the wall there. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are honestly super. I'm just going to grab both of them. Yeah. These are super handy threads to have in your sewing room. Like I said, they are threads, but I also consider them like a tool or a notion, really, because they really help with your projects and help with your sewing. And it's not just kind of like, oh, that's a novelty thing. Like I actually find these are super useful. So if you're looking for ways to kind of make things a little bit easier, make things a little bit more precise, these are really handy tools. And again, the iron-infused replaces things like kind of like fusible webbings or fusible tapes or even basting glue, things like that. It's really handy. And for the rinse and gone, anytime you need to like baste anything and want to be able to remove it easily, this is the guy you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So we hoped you learned something new and discovered something fun. Maybe you didn't even know that these threads even existed, but now you do, and now you know all the different ways you can use it. And if you don't know or don't remember what we talked about, we will be reposting this video. We do already have YouTube videos about these threads on our page, so you can always go back in the meantime and look at those first. And
I'm sure many of you heard about this also from our newsletter.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. If you're not part of our newsletter, you can definitely just sign up from our website, which is wonderfill.ca. If you are already part of our newsletter, thank you. And we'll probably send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording. So for those of you that maybe just joined in at the end or could only join at the beginning, we'll have it available for a little bit so you guys can take a rewatch.
Exactly. And speaking of newsletter, I don't know if you guys knew, but this year Wonderfill is doing a free block of the month paper piecing pattern. So right. There's already almost 800 people, I think, in our Facebook group that are a part of this. And so if you don't know about it, we've been releasing a different pattern every month. It's based on flowers this year, but just sign up to our newsletter and you'll be able to receive the patterns every month. And if you're joining late, don't worry, because you'll have access to all the previous patterns already. And we're doing lots of giveaways and things like that in the Facebook group as well. So join along if you want to have a little bit of extra fun with us.
Yeah. And then I see, will this be a regular happening? Me and Calista do have plans to resume more of our thread talks. We've been quite busy this year so far. I know we did more thread talks last year, but we definitely hope to do this a little bit more regularly and interact with everyone.
Exactly. And actually, we've been speaking to a lot of guilds this year. So you might not have seen us very publicly on YouTube or on Facebook, but we've been speaking to a lot of guilds about their education and things like that. So if you guys are interested, you can always reach out to us. All the information is on our website. And yeah, hopefully we'll be back soon with another thread talk. We'll come up with another interesting topic, hopefully.
Yeah.
And
I'm just going to answer this one question before we sign off. Does it work with regular tension? Yes, it does. It's about a 40 weight thread, which is pretty general for general use. So you won't really have to do anything funky with your tensioning there.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in today. Again, check out our newsletter. We have so much through education and educational tips on our social media channels as well. So find us there. And if we didn't answer any of your questions today, drop it in the comments or talk to us online. We have live chats. We have our social media DMs. Any way you can reach us, we'll try to answer all your thread questions.
Yeah, and if there's anything else you want us to cover in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out to us in any of those forms.
Yeah, give us some ideas. What should we talk about next time? All right. Okay, so happy Friday. Have a great weekend. I think spring is just around the corner. Hopefully, wherever you are, it's going to be great weather and you'll have a
good weekend.
A good weekend. All right, everyone. Bye.
Bye.